Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show here on Reason and Theology. So, big news, the Vatican just came out with its document on monogamy versus polygamy, and it's weighed in on the question of polygamy, something that we knew it would be doing because we heard a document was coming down the pike addressing the situation, especially in Africa, where there are people who enter the church and are in polygamous unions. So what exactly do we do with them? So the document just released, and you can breathe a sigh of relief. No, the document does not approve of polygamy. If you were thinking it was going to, yeah, no, it did not. And it's actually a very strong statement on the church's teaching on monogamy and the church's teaching on the fact that a marriage is a union between a man and a woman. And it draws on creation, the biblical account from the Bible, church fathers, important theologians, and also many magisterial documents. So ecumenical councils and popes and so on and so forth. And so I think this is a document a lot of people are going to be very happy with. And again, you can breathe a sigh of relief. It has not approved of anything against the faith. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to tell you what all you need to know about the document. Coming up next, right here on the Michael Lofton Show. So everybody make sure to hit the subscribe button and the like button if you appreciate the content of this channel and the breakdowns that I offer on magisterial documents when they come out. And yes, this is a magisterial document. This has been approved by the Pope. So this was released by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. This is the doctrinal arm of the Vatican, of the Pope. The Pope has various dicasteries that take care of and kind of assist him in all sorts of things, whether it's in interpreting canon law or something to do with the liturgy or disciplining a clergy or writing some kind of teaching document. There's different congregations and dicasteries that help him out with that. And this is that doctrinal arm of the church that helps the Pope with his teaching authority. And since it is approved by the Pope in what's called common form, this participates in the ordinary magisterium of the Pope, according to the Vatican's own document, Donum Veritatis. So it's authoritative, it requires religious submission of intellect and will in any kind of teachings and proposals that it puts forth. So it's not just some kind of congregation document. It is part of the Pope's teaching authority. And there is that expectation of submitting to the teaching authority being employed here. Okay, so I again want to reassure everyone that this document that we knew would be addressing polygamy does not at all in any way affirm polygamy. It is very clear on the point that marriage is between one man and one woman, again going back to creation, the way the design was in the very beginning in the book of Genesis. And it's careful to note that. And so there's no wiggle room here. You can't look at the document and define somehow marriage as polygamous in nature. It's very, very clear on that point. And for that, I'm very grateful. And I think many others are very grateful because it's a breath of fresh air to hear a reassertion of the church's teaching in a very clear way, especially when it comes to questions involving sexuality. There's sometimes sometimes there hasn't been the kind of clarity that we would like. And so here, this one is very clear on that particular point. So let's maybe just go over an overview of the document, and then I also want to read to you the presentation section that will kind of give you an idea of the document. So what this Vatican document actually is, let's maybe start there, and then we'll talk about what it's not, what it doesn't contain and what it doesn't affirm. So it's called In Praise of Monogamy, Una Caro in Praise of Monogamy, again by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. And it is a theological reflection specifically on monogamy. So it's dedicated to that topic. So it does, by extension, address the question of polygamy, but its primary purpose is to reaffirm the church's position on monogamy. Now, why was the document needed? Well, they specifically tell us it's because there was a group of bishops in Africa who were saying they're encountering people who are in polygamous unions and they're kind of needing some guidance and um, directing these people to the teachings of the church. So, because of that, they've requested a document, and the Vatican released one, and this is the product of it. So the document really aims to explain why the church values monogamy, especially in today's society where that is kind of put into question in the secular world. The church is asserting why it teaches monogamy and giving a explanation for it. And it's very clear about marriage being between one man and one woman, a message that, again, sadly has to be reaffirmed and emphasized these days, where, especially in the secular world, there's a push to move away from that. And sometimes, unfortunately, even within the Catholic Church, there are voices trying to move away from the church's teaching here. So it's good that it's reaffirming that and stating it very clearly at the outset. Now, what does it draw on? What are its sources for this teaching? Again, scripture. So the book of Genesis, for example, the church fathers, these are revered authorities in early Christianity, some of them bishops, some of them priests, some of them just, lay theologians, but all saints and all authoritative figures who are very, very admired for their writings and for their orthodox teachings in the church. So highly revered men, if you will. It's drawing on the wisdom of the church fathers throughout the document, as well as divine scripture. There's a number of medieval theologians that it's appealing to in some of their works, modern philosophers, some who are Catholic and some who are not. There's even some Eastern Orthodox that are being brought up here. And then also popes like Pope Leo the 13th all the way to Pope Leo the 14th. So John Paul II, Benedict, Francis, a lot of the post-conciliar popes, but also some of the pre-conciliar popes. The document is drawing from them, and it's drawing from documents like Casti Connubii or Humanae Vitae, some of those documents that are not maybe as popular in some circles today in the church, but should be reasserted and reaffirmed. And so it's good to see some use of those documents. And it also is appealing to some of the ecumenical councils. I think Leon's number 2 was in there, as well as the Council of Trent. And the Council of Trent is most noteworthy here on the question of polygamy, because it's the one that kind of dogmatized monogamy and excludes polygamy and puts an end to the question in a definitive manner. That's the Council of Trent, the Counter-Reformation, the ecumenical council that responded to the Protestant reformers like Martin Luther. And so it's drawing from councils like that. So there's a lot of sources that it's engaging and reasserting. Now, what we find here, though, is a clarification of something that is an underdeveloped theme, but certainly maybe I shouldn't say re-emerging, but an emerging theme. Often and historically, there's been an emphasis when the church talks about marriage. There's been an emphasis on the procreative aspect and also the indissolubility of that union. This document is very clear. It's not going to address those issues. That's not the purpose of the document. The purpose of this document is not to really address and get into indissolubility or the procreative aspect of marriage. There's other documents that the church does that. This one is to focus on an underdeveloped theme, which is the unitive aspect of marriage. There's those two aspects to marriage, the procreative aspect and the unitive aspect. And it's focusing on the latter and developing that further. Which some will see as something good and to be welcomed. Others will be a little concerned because they feel like no, the procreative aspect needs to be reaffirmed in today's society. I can see a argument for addressing both. So I kind of get where different people come from on that debate that's really been taking place since the Second Vatican Council, because at Vatican II, the most recent ecumenical council, there was kind of a discussion on do we emphasize the procreative aspect or the unitive aspect? And one of the documents of the church at Vatican II ended up mentioning the unitive aspect first rather than second. And some took that as a sign that the principal aim of marriage is the unitive aspect, not the procreative. And the document doesn't say that, right? Now, I don't know if there was really an intention behind the order there, but that's kind of been a hot button topic since then, right? So they're touching a little bit on that question here. Although not changing anything that the church has taught here, in my estimation. So the document is a positive affirmation of monogamy. It's not intended to be like a condemnation of other kinds of unions, or a refutation of other ideas of sexuality. It's a positive statement and affirmation of the church's teaching, more than a defense, more than something that's there for like condemnation of other unions that deviate from the um, design of God and from the church's teaching. So what the document is not, let's maybe discuss that as well, right? And then I want to take a look at the presentation section. So the document is not a document on aspects of sexuality that deviate from God's design. It's not about contraception per se. You can argue that there's implications on all these things and what it teaches, but it's not like some kind of refutation of contraception, refutation of pornography, refutation of divorce and remarriage, or cohabitation, or something like that. It's not really going to get into like premarital sex or homosexuality and LGBTQ relationships and gender identity issues. You can certainly argue that what it's stating has implications on those things, most certainly. But it's not a document that's written and designed to be some kind of refutation of those other things. Um, as much as maybe we kind of need more documents, not only reasserting the teaching of the church, but also refuting some of those other things, it's not that. Um, but it's also not an affirmation of those things either, right? So you're not going to find the document affirming homosexuality or affirming polygamy or affirming, contraception. That's not what it is. And those things would be rejected implicitly by what it does affirm. It's not a document on indissolubility of marriage. Again, procreation. What's the principal purpose of marriage? Is it the procreative versus the unit? It's not about that. It's also not a pastoral guide for complex situations like polygamy. And I think that maybe some of us were expecting it to be that. It does address, again, the issue of polygamy, but it doesn't necessarily address how to accompany people who are in polygamous unions and bring them to a right state. It's not that practical guide. So in my estimation, what it is and what it's good for, it's a good reaffirmation of the church's teaching on monogamy. And it's a good summary of the biblical and magisterial and patristic and conciliar evidence for the church's teaching on monogamy. So if that's what you're looking for, this is that document, right? Maybe some things that it lacks, however, is an engagement with some of the hot button topics in a more explicit and condemnatory manner. I do think that there's room for that and a need for that. And maybe that's coming in a different document, perhaps. But this document is that and is not that. And maybe there should have been some room for that. I totally understand the purpose of kind of focusing on a positive affirmation of the church's teaching and not necessarily focusing on condemning other unions and views on sexuality. I understand maybe some of the wisdom behind that, but I do think that in today's day and age where there is such an emphasis on trying to get the church to shift in its teaching here. Um, that restatement of condemnation in an explicit manner needs to be made. I think that there's an argument to say there's a need for that. And also, it's not a pastoral guide on how to address people who are in polygamous unions. So, what exactly do we do with them? Like, if they're in polygamy and they convert to the church, upon what conditions are they able to receive the Eucharist or something like that? It's not addressing necessarily that question, although we could maybe look to some other church documents that would. I was hoping there would be a more thorough engagement of that question on how to practically address people who are in that union who want to convert. But they're in this particular situation. What exactly does the church do to accompany them and pastorally guide them in a way that's not in tension with the church's teaching, and also not in tension with the church's teaching on who should receive the Eucharist? Um, so I was hoping there would be a little bit of an engagement there. Unfortunately, there wasn't, and I kind of feel that was the principal need for the document. I My understanding was the African bishops were looking for kind of a pastoral guide to accompany people. I don't know if that's what this is. That being said, I'm not necessarily complaining because I think it's always a good thing when the church reaffirms its traditional teaching on marriage, right, and monogamy. So that's a win, right? So whatever it may lack, there's some good things here as well. And so, in my opinion, it's a good document. It's a net gain. It's something you can breathe a sigh of relief over rather than thinking, oh goodness, here's another controversy. I don't think it's that. Now, hey, I don't know. Maybe somebody will come out and say, "Hey, I think this particular part is controversial," and some controversy will come out of it. But it doesn't necessarily strike me as something like that. Um, okay, so let's maybe just read very briefly the presentation. I'll read it to you. Um, I have it in front of me. Presentation is that part before the introduction of the document, which is very, very lengthy. And I'll say, okay, look. I've said this before. I'll have to say it again. I don't know how effective it is in today's day and age to have very long verbose documents. I don't think that that's very productive. I think it's helpful to have shorter, brief, and more direct statements and documents, and have them more frequently rather than less frequent documents. But when they come out, they're incredibly long and verbose and very long-winded. That's my personal preference. That's I what I think would be more effective as a communicator, as a teacher, but it's just my opinion. So it's a very lengthy document. There will be some who will read through the whole thing, but that's going to be um, pretty exceptional. Whereas I think that if it were a shorter document that states the same thing, but just more succinctly, more people would be likely to read the whole thing. Okay, so the presentation says this is a text for the universal church. So it's not like just for one quarter of the church, one rite, one section. It's for the entire church. Yet it can be duly considered in every place in the face of local cultural challenges, such as in Africa. The document, in fact, takes seriously the current global context of the development of technological power, in which human beings are tempted to think of themselves as limitless creatures, capable of achieving whatever they imagine. In this way, the value of an exclusive love reserved for a single person is easily obscured, which in itself implies the free renunciation of many other possibilities. In truth, the intention of this note, because it's a doctrinal note, is fundamentally propositional, to extract from sacred scripture, from the history of Christian thought, from philosophy, and even from poetry, reasons and motivations that push us to choose a unique and exclusive union of love, a rich and all-encompassing mutual belonging. So it's just basically saying, we're going to try to show you, based on scripture and the magisterium and the church fathers, that this is the way to go. This effort will enrich reflection and teaching on marriage with an aspect that has so far been underdeveloped. At the same time, it could provide varied and useful material for marriage movements and groups of study and dialogue. This explains the length of the note and the number of authors and texts cited. Some may find this selection excessive, but we believe that each of the authors and texts cited can provide nuances that stimulate serene reflection and sustained study. So it's explaining why it's kind of long winded. And I understand that. I think there's some wisdom to that, but I also explain why I think it's important to be brief. We will consider the most important works of the magisterium in a series of authors from ancient to recent times, theologians, philosophers, and poets. We have found a wealth of reflections that emphasize the union of spouses, reciprocity, and the all encompassing meaning of the marital relationship. Thus, the diverse texts will compose a beautiful mosaic that will surely enrich our understanding of monogamy. If, however, one wishes to grasp only a brief reflective summary to justify the choice of an exclusive union between a single woman and a single man, there it is in the presentation. Thank you for that, by the way. Thank you for that, uh, Cardinal Fernandez, who's the principal author here. Thank you for stating that at the outset. I think that's certainly needed today, where people may only read the presentation. An exclusive union between a single woman and a single man, it will be sufficient to read the last chapter and conclusion of this note, which focus on the mutual belonging of spouses and on conjugal charity. In any case, we suggest patiently reading the note in its entirety to fully grasp the breadth of the aspects involved in this rich subject, which I certainly recommend people do, although I'm a realist. I realize the majority of people aren't going to do that, right? So, you know, uh, be that as it may, if you don't have time to sit down and read the entire thing, that's understandable. Hopefully, this video gives you a quick overview of what the document is and isn't. And I will include a link to it in the show notes so that you can go and read the full thing. Right now, it's only out in Italian, but Google Translate has an automatic English translator. And so maybe avail yourself of that tool and read through it if you would like. But this should give you a quick summary, overall explanation of what the document is and is not, and perhaps give you a sigh of relief if you were concerned that it was going to be maybe some kind of way to allow for polygamy in some kind of indirect way. If it's that, I didn't get that impression. It seems to me it's not that. And so I think, again, you can breathe a sigh of relief. Well, anyways, everybody go and check out the lecture I will be delivering this Saturday at rtcourses.com on Can Church Teaching Change? We will look at what the magisterium itself says on the subject. And once you purchase that reservation to your spot for the lecture this Saturday, you'll get 40% off my lectures on the magisterium that teach you everything you need to know about what the magisterium is, its history, and how to read magisterial documents like this one, and how to know how authoritative they are. So certainly go and take advantage of that discount while it's still available. I look forward to seeing all of you at the lecture, and that's going to do it for today. Thank you all, and God bless.